and welcome. If you're involved in global trade, you've probably heard about letters of credit. But the real engine that makes them work is a very specific, secure message called the Swift MT700. And today, we are going to decode that message together.
It's a huge question, isn't it? One that can certainly keep importers and exporters up at night. The answer, though, isn't some kind of magic. It's a highly structured, super secure message that acts as the financial backbone for countless deals every single day.
For anyone new to trade finance, looking at an MT700 can be, well, pretty intimidating. It just looks like a wall of numbered fields and strange jargon. It almost feels like you're trying to read a secret code. But don't worry, that's exactly why we're here today, to decipher it piece by piece.
We're going to walk through this together step by step. My goal is that by the end of our time, you'll be able to confidently look at a letter of credit, identify what each part means, and more importantly, understand why it's there in the first place.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll start with the fundamentals, the basic language of issuance. After that, we'll look at how the MT700 actually defines the specifics of a transaction. Then we get to the really important part, the core promise of payment. We'll cover that all-important documentary checklist, and finally, we'll wrap things up by answering some common questions to make sure it all clicks.
All right, let's begin with the absolute foundations. We can call this the language of issuance. Every single letter of credit starts right here.
First things first, what is a documentary credit, or LC? At its core, it's a solid, firm promise from a bank that they will pay a seller. You can think of it as being kind of like an escrow service, but instead of just money, it's all based on documents. The bank holds onto that promise of payment, and they will only release it when the seller proves they've done their part of the deal by providing the correct paperwork. So, how does this promise travel securely from a buyer's bank in, say, New York to a seller's bank in Shanghai? Well, that's where the Swift MT700 comes into play. It is the specific, standardized message format that banks use on the secure Swift network to communicate all the details of a new documentary credit. Now, one of the very first and most critical fields you are going to see is field 40E for applicable rules. This basically sets the rule book for the entire deal. Most of the time, you're going to see UCP latest version here. That stands for the Uniform Customs and Practice for Documentary Credits. It's the global standard that everyone agrees on for how banks will interpret terms and handle documents. Now that we understand the basic instrument and the rules of the game, let's look at how the MT700 defines the specific details of a transaction. We're talking about the who, the what, and the how much. Several fields here act like the cast list for our transaction. Field 50 identifies the applicant, that's the buyer. Field 59 names the beneficiary, that's the seller, who's going to get the payment. And then fields 31C and 31D, they set the clock. They establish the issue date and, really crucially, the deadline and location for the seller to present their documents. If you miss that deadline, the whole deal could be in jeopardy. Next up, let's talk money. Field 32B is pretty straightforward. It just states the currency and the maximum amount the bank is promising to pay. Then we have Field 39A, which is really interesting because it defines the rules for flexibility, or what we call tolerance, in the amount of goods shipped or the final value. Let's look a little closer at this. On the left, we have the standard. If the credit describes goods by weight, like 500 kilograms of coffee, but not by a specific number of bags, a plus or minus 5% tolerance in the quantity is just automatically allowed. But if you look at the right side, if the credit uses words like about or approximately, that tolerance actually doubles to plus or minus 10%. Understanding this little detail can save you from a lot of headaches. This brings us to the absolute heart of the matter. We know who's involved, we know how much money is on the line, but how does the seller actually get paid? This is the core promise of the letter of credit. The single most important operational instruction is found in field 41A. This field tells you exactly which bank is allowed to pay, and, just as important, how they will pay. Getting this right, or getting it wrong, has huge implications for the seller's cash flow. There are two main ways this happens. On the left, you see site payment. Just think of it as payment now. As soon as the seller presents the correct documents, the nominated bank pays immediately. And that's it, payment is final. On the right, you have negotiation. You can think of this as advance now. In this case, the bank advances the funds, but they often deduct interest. Now here's the key difference. Negotiation often comes with recourse, and that just means that if the buyer's bank finds a problem later, the negotiating bank can actually take that money back from the seller. That's a huge risk to understand. So, payment depends completely on presenting the right documents.
Our next section is all about that checklist, what the documents are, and the very precise standards they have to meet.
This is probably the single most important principle you need to remember about letters of credit. Banks are not concerned with the physical goods. They don't check if the shipment actually contains what it's supposed to. Their entire world is the documents presented to them. If the papers are correct, they pay. If they are not, they don't. It's that simple.
Two fields really define this world of paper. Field 45A gives the description of the goods exactly as it needs to appear on the invoice, and Field 46A is the master checklist. It lists every single document the seller must present, from the commercial invoice to the bill of lading and any other required certificates.
And let me tell you, attention to detail is everything. Even a difference that seems tiny can cause a huge problem. Take this real-world example. If the credit calls for tubes, but the invoice says pipes, a bank has every right to reject the documents. In the very precise world of LCs, they are not assumed to be the same thing. The description must match exactly.
But the rules can also have some interesting quirks. For example, if Field 46A requires an inspection certificate, but it doesn't say who has to issue it, the rules actually state that anyone can issue it, even the seller. Now, if the credit had said it needed an official or independent issuer, that flexibility would be gone.
Okay, we've covered the key components. Now let's put that knowledge to the test with a few common scenarios you're very likely to come across.
Here's the first one. Let's say the credit requires a commercial invoice, but the seller hands in a document that's titled provisional invoice. Is that okay?
The answer is a clear no. A provisional invoice is not considered a final commercial invoice, and unless the credit specifically allows for it, a bank is going to reject it as a discrepancy.
Second question. An LC is available by negotiation, and the seller wants their money right away. What's the financial consequence for them? The cost is interest. When a bank negotiates, they're basically giving an advance. So, to make up for the time that they are out of pocket before they get paid back by the issuing bank, they will deduct interest from the payment they make to the seller.
How about this one? The beneficiary in the credit is United Manufacturer Limited, but on the invoice, it just says United Manufacturer. Is that a problem?
Generally, this is not a discrepancy. The rules do allow for minor variations, like dropping limited or co., as long as the change doesn't fundamentally alter who the party is.
Let's think about the seller's bank, which is called the advising bank. When they get the MT700, is it their job to read it and warn the seller if something seems impossible or difficult to do?
And the answer here is no. The advising bank's main job is to check that the message seems authentic and then pass the terms on exactly as they received them. The responsibility for making sure the terms are workable falls completely on the seller.
And for our last question, a bank gets the documents and finds some errors, but they forget to notify the presenter that they're rejecting them within the allowed time. What happens then?
The consequence for the bank is really severe. They have a maximum of 5 banking days to examine documents and give notice that they're refusing them. If they miss that deadline, they lose the right to say the documents were non-compliant. They are forced to pay, even with the errors.
So, let's just bring it all together. Decoding an MT700 really comes down to finding 4 key pieces of information: the parties and the amount, the payment method in Field 41A, and that critical document checklist in Field 46A. If you get those right, you're well on your way, because at the end of the day, the entire transaction depends on executing those documentary instructions perfectly.
Here's a powerful way to think about it. The MT700 acts like a universal machine language for global trade, and banks follow the code exactly. The banks are the computers. They don't try to figure out what you meant to do. They simply execute the instructions written in the fields exactly as they appear.
So that brings us to a final thought for you. Now that we've gone through the core components, which single field do you think holds the biggest potential for a costly mistake for someone who's just starting out? Is it getting the description of goods wrong, misunderstanding the payment method, or maybe something else entirely?
I would genuinely love to read your perspective down in the comments. If you found this guide helpful, please give it a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the mechanics of global trade. Thank you so much for your time and attention today.
Stay ahead in the world of global commerce. Subscribe to Vanija for expert analysis. And don't forget to like this video.